Welcome to this Negotiation Masterclass edition of Negotiate Anything. With over 1,600 episodes featuring some of the world's brightest minds, we've carefully curated 3 powerful conversations for you. What makes this so special is that you'll hear how different experts from different industries approach the same challenge in their own unique ways. Our goal is to give you multiple perspectives so you can build your own unique style. Success doesn't look the same for everyone, and in this masterclass, you will see exactly why. Let's dive in. Joe, thanks for joining us today.
Kwame, thank you for having me. I appreciate the invite.
No, man, it's my pleasure. Long overdue, and this is going to be a lot of fun. So how would you get us started by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I am in sales. I have been in sales since I was 14, and I'm quite a bit older than 14 now. So I've been kind of looking at processes. I've been, taught to read books and do what other people have done along the way. And I've kind of developed my own technique that I think works very well for all businesses and services. And my particular company, VIP, proudly represented behind me, we do accounting and finance recruitment as well as financial solutions for companies. We're based out of Dallas, Texas.
Fantastic. Yes, I'm excited. And so listeners, Joe and I met because I had the opportunity to do a negotiation training at his company. And Joe was answering all the questions. I'm like, I need to have this guy on the podcast. So we made it happen. And today we're going to talk about a really interesting part of the sales and negotiation process, and it's the discovery call. And so first, we're going to talk about why it's important to pay special attention to the discovery call. Then we're going to focus on understanding the goals of the other side. And then lastly, how and when to bring up price. So Joe, sell us on this. Why is it so important for us to care at all about this part of the process?
The discovery call is the most important part of the sales process. That is where I am trying to figure out how my product aligns with what you need, why you are looking at products and services, and if I need to spend my time continuing to speak with you and sell my product, or if I need to cut ties because it doesn't look like it's going to be a fit. A proper discovery call should be both sides trying to weed each other out. And if they can't weed each other out, then we move on to the next step.
This is fascinating. And I think what's so interesting about it to me is the fact that a lot of times, especially with young people who are in sales, they're saying, okay, I want to get everybody as a client, every prospect, I want to close every prospect. But it seems like you have a different approach here because you're saying it might not be a good fit and I'm willing to let that go.
Yeah, I'm looking for it to not be a good fit. I think that's what you do when you're working from a place of abundance, right? If I've got 70 phone calls from 70 people today who are all interested in purchasing my product, I'm going to try to cut things short where I think there's no alignment. It's hard to have that same mentality when you're starting a new business or you're starting a new territory and you want every sale that gets in front of you. But that's not always the best case. You've still got to have the same thought process. You've got to work from a concept of abundance.
Okay, so this is good because I really like the mindset element that you just brought in. And I think this is something that we need to incorporate, whether you're in sales or you're not in sales, you're a leader, those type of things, that mindset of abundance. And so let's actually dig into that part of this process. Can you tell us what you mean by the mindset of abundance and how it helps?
Yeah, my time is worth money. Your time is worth money. And I don't want to be spending my time chasing a sale that isn't going to align. So I've developed a series of questions that I ask to make sure that there is alignment and that there's buy-in. And as I run through those for you as we go through this, it all seems to come together and it makes sense. And it helps both sides truly understand how the product or the service fits into their particular needs.
Yeah. And when I think about the mindset of abundance, I think about the opposite too, the scarcity mindset. And that's dangerous. That is when you're in dangerous territory because now you start to move from passion to desperation. And if you sound desperate, that is a turnoff. That is a turnoff in business. It is a turnoff in romance. It is in general a turnoff, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a scary place to be. You don't want to be there for sure.
Exactly. And what I've found is that when you have that mindset where you're saying, okay, I don't necessarily need this, it resonates with people. It causes people to be more drawn to you. But if you feel desperate, they're wondering to themselves, well, why don't other people want what it is that you're trying to offer? I kind of want to pull away. And the more you push, the more they go away. And so I think it's just counterproductive in all sorts of different ways too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely agree with you.
Nice. And so tell us again, now going deeper into the process of the sales cycle, you said that in our prep call, you mentioned that the discovery call makes the sales cycle a lot easier. And so, and it also makes it easier for you to sell up the ladder. And what do you mean when you're talking about selling up the ladder?
A lot of times the salesperson connects with the person who is not the decision maker. So asking the proper questions to find out what the process is for making that decision, and having a full understanding of how that operates and being able to take control of that so that you are not being pushed around through their sales cycle, but maybe grab a better understanding of their sales cycle and then help them understand there may be some things we need to change here in order for this to be a more fluid process for both of us. If I understand that the CEO or the CFO has a certain directive that they're trying to get to, then I know how my product fits in with that placement. And that's what I talk about selling up the ladder, so that I can then bring that person into the sales process as early as possible to have those conversations with them and they have a truer understanding of how everything fits together.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And what you're doing there, you're gathering information so you can create a better strategy. Right. And I think a lot of times people come into these conversations and they say, this is my strategy. And they think about their strategy in a static type of way. But what we're seeing here is that the strategy is going to be dynamic based on the information that you get during this call.
Exactly. Being a truly active listener and trying to figure out where there's alignment and where things aren't in alignment fast forwards the sales process immensely.
Yep, absolutely. And moving on to the next part, we're talking about understanding their goals. And so in order to understand their goals, we have to be curious, ask questions. And you mentioned that you have a set of questions that you typically ask, right?
Yes, absolutely. The very first question that I ask is, what are the top 3 goals for your company to accomplish this year? And I usually ask it from the CEO or CFO perspective. So if I'm talking to them directly, I can ask that directly. If I'm talking to a person that's any title or position underneath that, I say, if we went to your CEO or your CFO and we asked for the top, 2 or 3 goals to achieve this year, walk me through that. Help me understand where the company wants to go. So the purpose behind that question is that there's going to have to be money allocated to whatever my product or service is. And if it doesn't fit into your company's business goals, I don't care how much you like it. I don't care how much I want to sell it to you. The odds of it having funds allocated towards it are going to diminish. So I want to make sure from the very first question that I understand what the company's goals are, and that at some point I start tying my product or my service into your company's goals for the year.
Joe, the thing that I like about this is that this is next level stuff, because I think what a lot of people would focus on is, what do you want my specific product or service to do for you? But you're starting in a completely different space. You're saying, forget my product or service for a second, just overall company goals. I think that's really fascinating. And I want to really hammer down on this. So why is it so important to start there versus focusing on what your product and service can do for them in the short term?
It's a great question. For me, I can't answer your future questions without knowing that first, right? My product or my service might be able to do 25 different things. But if only 6 of them tie in with your company's most important goals, then I only want to talk about those 6. I want to talk about the 6 things that are the most important to you. The rest of it is a waste of your time and a waste of my time. And, ultimately, it's not of importance to you. So I hate the sales calls where I hop on the phone with somebody for the first time, or I meet in a room with them the first time. They sit down and smack their hands on the table and they say, okay, tell me about your product. And I have to redirect there. And I have to say, you know what, I'd love to tell you about my product, but first I want to find out what's most important to you. So let me ask you, if I was asking your CEO or your CFO, what your company's direction is this year, what would their top 2 or 3 goals be? And I turn that conversation, and it's usually very well received.
That's fascinating. And so here's the thing. As you were saying that, it made me think, that should have been a sparring session where that's what I do. But I think this is a great example here, because if we think about it in terms of a fork in the road, that's often what happens, almost like a decision tree. Different approaches will lead to different directions for the conversation. And if you're not well versed in what's happening, you don't even realize that there's a fork in the road. You just assume that this is the way. And so I think for a lot of people, they're recognizing, I didn't even recognize that there was an alternative option for that critical portion of the conversation. And so a lot of people, they are busy. And sometimes they are really busy, and sometimes they feel like they're busy. But regardless, it manifests itself the same way. They want to get through the conversation very quickly. And so they want to just get down to the business, right? Joe, what can your company do? And so it's at that moment that you're redirecting. Now, for you, again, going back to the mindset, how is it that you're able to avoid that pressure and redirect, even though they clearly want you to go in a different direction?
I don't know that it is pressure or that I feel pressure with it. That's probably a major portion of it. Again, I've fine-tuned this, so I know what direction I want it to go from the time I walk in the door. But the reason I say I don't feel pressure from it is because ultimately that question, the tell me about your product, tell me about your service, usually comes from them not knowing where to start. They're busy. They haven't planned out this meeting the way I have. I've spent hours doing my research before I go sit down with somebody. And typically they're just walking into the meeting fairly fresh and sometimes don't remember quite why they set the meeting with you. So they haven't put as much time and effort. They don't know where to go. So that's a very simple question for them to ask. Tell me about your product or service. So I think it shows them, look, I have an interest in your business, and I want to know a little bit more about you before I move forward with talking about how I'm going to be able to help, if I'm going to be able to help.
That makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. And again, listeners, for people who have listened to the podcast, I know they know what's coming. You see the value of preparation. And that's why you should download our free negotiation guides. You have over 15 free guides to choose from: business negotiation, salary negotiations, all those different things. But the key is preparation. So doing your research and strategic preparation to know what kinds of questions you're going to ask and when you're going to ask those, that's really helpful. And again, Joe, to your point, like you said, you're not feeling that pressure because you saw this coming and you had a plan, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important for people to take the time to prepare. So AmericanNegotiationInstitute.com/guide, and there's a link in the description below too. So this is fantastic. And so let's say we get past that first question. I know you said there's a series of questions that you ask. What comes next?
What comes next is what you thought was going to be the first step. And that is, what gaps do you have in your current process that you're trying to fix? Why are we here? And so I have them walk me through what those gaps are. And I have a series of questions, and it's a very natural flow of communication from there. So once you start telling me, so I'm in the recruiting game, right? So they say, okay, well, we've got a controller, our controller's leaving, and we need to replace this particular seat. And I'll say, okay, so what are we trying to look to replace? Were there any gaps in the previous seat that you would like to fill? And then knowing the company's directions that we've already discussed, are there some skills that are going to be needed to move from this point forward? So we have that conversation surrounding either the product or the service, but I want to hear from you what you need. Again, I'm trying to drill down into what's important to you. I don't want to talk about everything that we do. I want to talk only about what's important to you.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And, I think about it in terms of the distinction between aiming and firing. right?
Mhm.
And so you're spending a lot of time aiming, so you don't need to take that many shots. And what I'm seeing is that it's curiosity driven, which again, for listeners of the show, not very surprising, right? It works. And so again, for people who are newer at this or might have the challenge of over talking, how do you pull back when you want to tell them what the right answer is? Because a lot of times I know you already know, you have a reasonable assumption of what that might be, and you just want to go straight there. So how do you hold back?
That's a great question. In my discovery calls, I don't talk very much. My purpose is not to talk. My purpose is to schedule a second conversation where we actually dig into my end of business. So during my discovery call, I don't feel pressured to start telling you about what we do, how we do it, how I'm going to solve the world's problems, and yours while we're at it. That is just not, that's not how I do it. I schedule a very short, somewhere between 15 to 30 minutes to run through these questions. And the goal of my discovery call, and I will tell them this before we have the discovery call, the goal is to figure out if we want to allocate more time to it after that. Then we're going to schedule 30 minutes to an hour to actually walk through how my product or service is going to fit to what you need.
Oh man, this is great. This is really, really great. Fantastic. And so again, under understanding their goals, that's what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Is there another question that comes next that you already have planned?
Oh, there's, like I said, there's a series. So once I understand what you want, then I want to find out what you've been doing to work around that. So if it's a product you're looking at, or maybe a software, and you say, well, my software doesn't do this. It's gotten us to this point, but it's not going to get us to move forward. I'm looking at ways that we're going to be able to improve our processes as we move forward. That helps me understand what they're looking for. But then my next step is to challenge them and to say, well, I'll ask them, what have you been doing to close those gaps now? How have you been working around the issues that you're having? And I let them walk me through that process. And usually it's pretty painful for them. They'll say, well, we're working later nights, we're working more hours. We're stretched a little bit thin right now, and we need something that's going to help us get away from that. And I challenge them at that point. And I say, well, what's driving you to start to look at a product instead of just continuing to do things the way you've been doing them? Obviously, what you've been doing is working, and talking to me, if it works out, is going to cost the company money in terms of my product. So why not just keep doing what you're doing? And that is where the sale starts to happen.
That's brilliant. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And one of the things I like about this too is that we often hear the importance of the feeling of pain and discomfort in the sales process.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening is you're not the person pushing the pain, they're sharing it. So it's almost like that negativity isn't associated with you. It's not Joe coming in and making me feel bad about myself. It's Joe asking me a question and recognizing and helping me to recognize just how bad the situation is.
Yeah. I studied martial arts for a little bit, a little portion of my life. And one of the things that we learned very quickly is push-pull, right? If I push you, you're going to lean into me. And if I pull you, you're going to pull back. So what you're talking about right now just always ticks that in my mind of, if I start saying, oh, you've got pain here, I understand this, I understand that, and I pretend to understand your business by trying to pull you in, you're going to start leaning back and you're going to start defending the way you've been working around those gaps. And now I've put myself at a deficit versus just asking you, why don't you just continue doing what you're doing? Why are you starting to look at this? And is that worth it to you? So I get a much different reaction.
Yeah.
They start selling my product or my service for me. They start understanding, they talk themselves through why they need to be on the phone call with me.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Smoother process for you.
Yeah. So from there, I typically ask, well, so then how are solving these issues going to affect your team? how are solving these issues going to affect you? And once they answer that question, then that's a little portion where I take time to talk and I say, okay, so if I'm looking at the top 3 goals of the company and I'm looking at how this fits together, it seems like purchasing this particular product is going to bring down the number of hours that you guys are working on getting these things done, which is going to decrease your spend there, and it's going to allow your team to enjoy the position, which means less turnover. And if your goal this year is growth, then you're not going to have to be dealing with turnover and a poor team mentality as you're bringing new people in. So that's the portion where I draw everything together.
I love it, because what's happening here is that you spent the first part of the conversation allowing them to give you exactly what you need at this critical part of the conversation, right? Because you're taking their words and then taking your solution and putting them together and just saying, hey, by the way, look what I found. It seems a lot more organic.
It is organic and it's honest. So, these aren't questions that I've come up with to be able to push somebody into working with me. They're questions that I've really developed because I'm trying to figure out if it makes sense for me to work with them as well. And I really am coming at it from a place where I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste my time. If this doesn't look like it's going to align or doesn't work, or if you don't have answers to these questions, if you don't know what your company's top 3 goals are, I'm going to hold your feet to the fire. And I'm going to tell you, hey, that's pretty important to our conversation. Would you mind doing a little research for me and shooting me a bullet pointed email that gives me that so that I can understand your business a little bit better? It's important to have that.
Right. And so from this point, now you've shared the information, you've shared the solution. What happens next in your process?
That's where I try to figure out where the person is coming from. So the question I would ask next is the directive to look at this and to look at the product or to look at the service. Is that your initiative or is that coming from somebody above you? That question is very important because that leads into what you were talking about earlier is who's actually making the decision here, right? So everybody else asked that question. Well, are you making the decision on this product? Well, to me, that's a push question. So they're going to lean back in and yes, I'm the decision maker. And you're going to find out a few days down the road that they've got to take it to their boss, and then their boss has to take it to the board, and the board has to approve it. So when I ask that question, the thought process is, if you tell me that this is something that you're pushing, then I might challenge you a little bit on it and say, hey, are you going to have buy-in from your superiors, or how is this going to work? Most of the time, people will tell me, well, this is actually coming from my boss. And I'll say, well, is he getting pushed from above him? And what does that mean for the actual decision-making process at the end? Are these people going to be involved? And if they are going to be involved, how soon or how early can we get them included in the process?
Yeah, this is great, Joe. I really especially enjoy the recognizing the strategy that you're using with the techniques, right? Because again, it's organic and it's genuine, it's honest, it's ethical, but it's intentional. I think that's what's so important, because people say, okay, Kwame, you say ask questions, I'm going to ask questions. Now, there are levels to this game when it comes to asking questions. You need to ask the right questions at the right times and formulate it the right way, because what you demonstrated here is that there are ways to get to the authority question without asking, do you have authority? Right? Because you want to create some psychological safety, allowing them to feel comfortable sharing that information. And the way that you approach it, the framing that you use for the conversation and the question is going to be, those things are going to be very important when it comes to being successful with the question that you're asking.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And there's another place for a challenge there. So if we get to a point where it looks like it makes sense for us to go ahead and schedule the next meeting, then I will tell them flat out, can we get the decision makers involved in this part of the process. And I explained to them that the reason is I've been doing this long enough to know that I'm going to explain it to you and you're going to ask intelligent questions and I'm going to answer those intelligent questions. And then you're going to go to your boss and you're going to disseminate the information. And then your boss is going to ask you intelligent questions, but they're going to ask you a question that you didn't think to ask. And then you're going to have to come back to me. And then I'm going to have to go back to you. And then you're going to have to go back to them. And before you know it, all of the time that you and I spent together doing a demonstration of the product, I'm going to have to do it again. I'm going to have to do it again with that person. So can we just get them involved from the beginning and make everybody's life a little bit easier?
Yeah. And I really appreciate how you are laying out the reason why. You're not just saying, can the decision maker come? Period. Again, the way that you structure it is really important because you tell them very vividly what's going to happen. And at the same time, you do it in a way that is respectful to their position too, because we say, listen, you're asking me great questions. I know you understand this. They're going to ask questions and it's not going to be your fault that you don't have those answers. This is not an indictment on your performance. This is just a reality of the situation.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say stick to your guns on that too, because I can't tell you how many times I've scheduled the next conversation and let's say the CFO is accepted the request and then their schedule or their meeting changes at the last minute. And I'll hop onto a Zoom meeting and the other person will be on the line and they'll say, hey, I'm so sorry. Sarah can't make it. At the last minute, she had something come up. And I will cut it right there. And I'll say, you know what? I understand schedules change. Why don't we reschedule as soon as she's available?
Again, subtle but powerful, right? Because a lot of times it's the status quo bias. Well, I'm here, you're here. We allocated the time. He knows or she knows that I have the time. So they're going to just want to just do it, right? But I really respect the reality of your approach where you just say, no, this won't work. And I think during that process, in doing that, it causes them to respect you more, which ultimately puts you in a better position down the road for the close.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
So as we're going through that process, before I start, deciding whether or not we can schedule for our next time frame together or if it fits, that's when I talk price. And I know a lot of salespeople want to hold that part until the end, right? They want to have this whole conversation and bring you in and show you the value. And then, the money is the kind of last surprise at the end. I hate that. I think that's a horrible process. And because, we've all seen the videos online where there's something that you're interested in, you click on it, and then all of a sudden it's just information. And you're just thinking in your head, can I afford this? What does this thing cost? Is this worth it? And you can't really absorb the information because you're really locked into something else. So I will ask you directly, well, okay, so let's talk money. If this directive is coming from your CFO, then I would assume that you guys have talked about price. Is there a ballpark within which you need to work? And have you got that ballpark identified? Usually the answer is yes, we've identified a ballpark, but I don't feel comfortable sharing it with you, right? They don't know if their ballpark is too high or if it's too low. They don't want to be embarrassed by the number they've come up with. And I recognized that, so I'm prepared for it. And I say, okay, well, let me be candid with you. You've got these 3 major processes that you're trying to revamp. And my product does a lot of things, but it does those things. And I can do, we can cover those things at different ranges, right? We can go with this portion that solves a portion of your problem. We can solve 50% of your problem, or we can solve 100% of your problem. So we've got a price range that we're going to work within. And that price range usually falls between X and Y. Is that comfortable for you? Is that within your ballpark? Because if it's not, I don't want to waste your time or your boss's time or my time moving to the next step if it's something that you're just not comfortable with.
Yeah, that's good because you're setting expectations at that point, right? And gathering information based on their response.
hmm And I'm deciding if they are somebody who's got the funding available for me to continue to utilize my time trying to pursue. And if they're not, then I can go prospect. And prospecting is where your money's made. So I can spend more time going after business that I've got a much higher chance of getting. But what I've realized is that because so many people, salespeople, save that dollars and cents portion to the end, that they garner a much higher respect for you for just being upfront with it at the beginning and letting them know, here's our range. Are you good with it?
Makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And so when you're getting that response, what in particular are you looking for?
Which response are you referring to?
To the range. How does that sit with you?
I'm comfortable with it. If they give me a range, I love it if they give me a range and it's higher than what I cost. Because then I can then come back and tell them, oh, well, I'm glad you've allocated that amount of funding to this. I can see that this is important to you. I'm going to be like $10,000 less than that. So I think that this is going to be a refreshing conversation. If they're not able to give me their number and I'm just telling them what our range is, I mean, that's what we cost. That's our value. I know what the value of my service is. You've helped me understand how my company's value is built into the problems that you're trying to solve. So I'm completely comfortable having a dollars and cents conversation.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Nice. And so what else should we consider? Because we've taken the time to gather the information. We've asked these series of questions. We've really validated whether or not this is the person. It seems like we're in the right range at this point. Mm-hmm. Now, is this one of those situations where we say, all right, ABC is always be closing, or is there something else we should do before we rush to that portion?
Well, I think that depends on the product, right? So there are some places where that's it. If you've gotten through this conversation and you've got the decision maker on the phone and they're a go with everything, it's, what steps do we need to take next? What do I need to do next for you? And if they say, send me a contract, I'm sending a contract. If they say, hey, send me some bullet points and let me think through this, then it's the typical, okay, when do you want me to follow up? Do you want to follow up with me? How are we going to structure this? And if I can't get in touch with you on your desk phone, is there a direct number I can call to get in touch with you? And I love to tell people I am absolutely great with an okay or great with a yes. I'm okay with a no, but I have a difficult time with we're not sure, we need some time. And I let people know, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I mean, the people I need to love me are at home and they're going to love me unconditionally. You, Kwame, I'm glad that you like me, but I don't need you to love me. I just need you to be straight with me in the process.
That's great. And I feel like that's got to be liberating for clients too, for the prospects, because they can say, okay, well, I can just tell Joe like it is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if they know they're not going to hurt your feelings and that's just business, then that's just business. I do like to tell people, hey, if I do lose your business to someone else, I would appreciate it if you can give me any tips or tricks or pointers as to why you chose to go in a different direction, so that if there's something I need to look to add to my service or help you understand the value or the next person understand the value, I can better my business. So that's important information to have.
Yeah. And so in that situation, how often do people take you up on that and give you some helpful feedback?
I usually send them an email afterwards, and I'd say 9 times out of 10, they'll give me something. And sometimes it just comes down to, hey, we found somebody that's a little less expensive than you. Okay, that's fine. Again, I know that my services were there. I know that the value was there, but I also know that we have a value and we have a worth, and we don't want to dip down below that.
Yeah, no, this is great. This is fantastic, Joe. I really appreciate this. But before we go, can you let the listeners know again about you, your company, and how they can get in touch with you?
Oh, absolutely. So my company is VIP. We are in accounting and finance recruitment. We do executive recruitment. So your CEOs and then your CFOs on down the line in accounting. So from the CFO down to staff accountant, and even for temporary contract workers to fill in a gap. That's where we earn our dollars and cents. I think that we're fantastic at the controller and CFO level. Those are my favorite areas within which to work, because we've got a series of questions that are well thought out, much like this, to figure out, who needs to be in that seat, and again, how that seat needs to be improved with the next person. I think anytime you've got a vacancy in your company, it's an opportunity to improve your company. And then we also have a financial solutions division. So we can do financial consulting with company, and we do quite a bit of it. Mergers, acquisitions, revamping processes, helping people understand their business and help their business grow is extremely important. A lot of companies we work with, at the end of the year, they're getting audited by, PwC and some of your other, larger corporations, KPMG, and that costs a lot of money. Well, we're about 30% lower to 33% lower in cost than those companies. So a lot of people hire us to come in, look everything over first, clean everything up, so that when they do have to go to the people who cost the big dollars, their in and out processes are simple. And so they can find us online at wearevip.com. And if they want to reach out to me personally, welcome to shoot me an email at any time. It's my first initial J, my last name Nanez, Nanez, at wearevip.com.
Fantastic. Joe, thank you again for this masterclass. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kwame. I appreciate being here.
That was the first part of today's masterclass. Up next, we'll hear from another expert with a different approach, giving you even more strategies to add to your toolkit. Let's keep it rolling.
Nikki, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to spend this time with you.
Yes, likewise, my friend. So how about you get us started by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Okay. So I'm a sales coach and trainer, and I specialize in the conversation of sales. I primarily work with women and teach them how to have more strategic sales conversations. And so that's me. My company is Sales Maven.
And if I recall correctly, you may have written a couple of books and you might have a podcast too.
Yes, I have. I've written 3 books. My latest book, which was written a few years back, is called The Selling Staircase. So it's all about my framework for a sales conversation. So I break it down into a 5-step process. The Selling Staircase is a comprehensive, how do you walk somebody through a sales conversation and do it strategically while building a ton of rapport, which I feel like is something you talk about a lot. And that's the latest book. And then my second book is called Buying Signals: How to Recognize and Act on the Buying Signals That People Give. And the first book was something, I was sharing this with you before we hit record, is that I wrote it thinking nobody would read it. It was just for me to see if I could write a book. And but I am proud of it. It's called 6-Word Lessons on Influencing with Grace. And it's 100 tips around neurolinguistic programming specifically.
Oh, very, very cool. And that is a perfect segue into what we're going to talk about today, which is neuro-linguistic programming, also known as NLP. And I was telling Nikki that we haven't had a podcast episode on NLP, which I think is wild. So my bad, listeners, my fault. But we are rectifying that today with Nikki. So let's just get started with a definition. What is NLP?
So the neuro part of the N is the way we process information in our brains. The linguistics, for the L, right, is the way that you speak to others, the way that others speak to you, and also any internal dialogue that you've got going on. And the P is for programming, and that is about habits and patterns. So the neurolinguistic programming it's used around the world in a lot of different contexts and for a lot of different reasons. But I really break it down it's the study of communication. And how I bring it into my work, I will wrap this around my all-time favorite quote, which is, "Blessed are the flexible, for they shall not be bent out of shape." And I think when you learn NLP, it teaches you how to add flexibility to your style, your behavior, to pay attention to the other person you're in conversation with, to put them at ease so that they're more inclined to listen in the conversation, like listen to what you have to say, stay engaged in the conversation. And the third thing is be more revealing about what's important to them and what they're thinking about.
This is great. And listeners, you can really clearly see how this could be beneficial in our difficult conversations that we're having with other people and just communication in general. And before we get into like the deeper levels of NLP, I want to address some of the skeptics out here who might have been introduced to it in the past, because I know that I've run into some people when I've brought up NLP. Some of them kind of brush it aside and say, "Oh no, that's silly. It's pseudoscience," those type of things. But the way that you described it is very, very simple. Neuro, the way that the brain processes information, linguistic, how we speak to others and how we speak to ourselves, and then programming habits and patterns. That's all very simple, right? And there's nothing crazy about it. So I want to just address that little thing before we get into what NLP really is.
Yeah, there's a lot of misconception out there, with anything, psychology, any kind of technique that you learn. You can certainly use it in a manipulative way. You can also use it to be beneficial, right? So it's the yin and yang, it's the good and the bad. I've had people say to me when I've been in a presentation, I remember one time having a client, I was speaking at this large company. They hired me as their sales trainer, and I went in and, one of the guys in the room was like, "Oh, you have this background in NLP. Like that's mind manipulation, started by the military," which of course is not true, but that's, there are some misconceptions around it. And I think, do your research, but also if you're open to learning how to be a better communicator, you will find that the techniques that are taught in neurolinguistic programming can be highly impactful. I started studying NLP when I was working for a really large organization as a regional sales manager. And I started studying it with this idea that, it will make me better at sales. Like it'll improve my confidence around sales. And it certainly helped me in all of my sales conversations. But ultimately what it did is it taught me how to be a better communicator, which then improved all the relationships in my life. Because instead of showing up and being like, this is me, take it or leave it, go kick rocks if you don't like the way I speak or the way that I show up, I was more flexible in the way that I would show up in a conversation. I would pay attention to what the other person's style is, how they communicated, and I'd be willing to make some adjustments to allow the conversation to flow better. So that's what I would say to the skeptic is, there's nothing wrong with being a skeptic. Please do, for many reasons in life. And if you're willing to dig a little deeper and see what's possible for you, you may find that it will absolutely change the game in the way that you communicate.
I love it. Couldn't agree more. And I just got an email from the skeptic who said, "I am convinced, Nikki. Thank you. So how do I get started on this journey?" So let's talk about it. Okay. So how do we start with NLP? Where should we begin?
Well, I would say, we were just talking about like those of us who write books, right? There's some amazing, amazing books out there. Now, I started studying NLP. It's been, I think, about 20 years now. And the textbook that we used, it's not really a textbook, but it feels like a textbook to read it. It was part of our practitioner level course. It was the NLP for Dummies book. Do you remember when all the dummies books were super popular? It reads like a textbook. It's a, pretty intensive deep dive, but ultimately my favorite book to get people started on NLP is, I think it's called The Really Good Cartoon Book of NLP. So it's got some illustrations in it. It's very simple. It's sold on Amazon. I can't even tell you the author's name, so I apologize to the author for not thinking of what his name is off the top of my head. But it's a great little it's like little snippets of NLP, and then you can look at it and go, okay, am I interested in digging deeper around this? You can find the the encyclopedia of NLP online, and you can look up, and it breaks down different processes. And, that's for the scientific brain, the person who wants the like super deep dive. But I like the really good cartoon book of NLP because I like give me the basics so I can get started.
Nice. And listeners, you see all my friends, they're so humble. But we will be only linking to one book on NLP, my friend, and that will be yours. Okay. So we appreciate those other resources, but this is the Nikki show today.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. And one of the things you mentioned that I thought was really powerful, and it really speaks to the ethos of this podcast as well, is that you came into this trying to learn NLP in order to become better at sales. There was a transactional type of mindset that you had into it. And I think that's what a lot of people think about when they come to negotiation. So they stumble upon this podcast. A lot of them come because they searched salary negotiations or how to deal with difficult people or those type of things. And then they started to realize, wait a second, there's a little bit more here. And the definition that we use on the podcast is for negotiation is anytime you're in a conversation and somebody wants something, we want you to think about it as a negotiation. And with you, what you realized is you said, hey, NLP, I'm going to use this for sales. And then you started using it in other elements of your life. And so let's start with some foundational skills of NLP. When you are in a conversation, what are some elements of NLP that you typically use?
One of the easiest ones that is incredibly powerful is I pay attention to the rate of speech of the other person. Because I don't know when you think about your own rate of speech, like if we put a spectrum in front of you and we said, on a scale of, 1 to 10, 10 being like a super fast talker, somebody who like has a thought, it comes right out. They don't even like have to take a breath between sentences. Like that's somebody who talks really fast, right? And you find yourself in a conversation with somebody who speaks a little slower. It's very difficult for those two people to stay in a long conversation. One, because the person who speaks a little slower, it's hard for them to process and even get a word in the conversation. For the person who speaks really fast, the person who speaks really fast is looking at the person who speaks really slow and going like, oh my gosh, speed it up, man. I can't take this, right? And so whatever your style is, if you're willing to adjust to the other person, and you don't have to adjust 100% because we're not mimicking anybody, but if you're a fast talker and you're willing to slow down just a little bit, what will happen is the other person will likely start to speed up a little bit, and you guys will find this happy medium in the conversation. And the reason I like rate of speech, and vice versa on the other way too, if you're a slow talker, be willing to speed up a little bit. And the fast talker oftentimes will slow down a little bit. So whatever your rate of speech is, you're perfect, right? Like there's nothing wrong with you. It's just learning to add some flexibility to your behavior, again, to put the other person at ease. And I will say this because I don't know if you've noticed, but when you meet somebody who's similar to you in some way, we feel a connection to people who are like us. Like we like people who are like us. But here's the more important thing is when you meet somebody, and you tell me, Kwame, but when you meet somebody who's like you, that you get a sense of like, this person and I, we have a lot in common. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but you probably think that person is smart because you're smart. Right?
Yep.
Like, you're smart. And when you meet somebody who's like you like them, you'll stay in conversation with them longer and you'll think, gosh, this person is smart. We think alike. So when you're willing to make adjustments to the other person, it just builds connection faster. And, when you're speaking on Zoom, when you're in person with somebody, or when you're on the phone with somebody, you can always pick up rate of speech. The only time you can't do it is when you're just in email communication. So any live conversation, if you're willing to pay attention, somebody's rate of speech, and you're willing to adjust just slightly. In NLP, they say adjust 50 to 60% to the other person, not 100%, but if you can get 50%, even 40% is going to do better for the relationship. You will find that you'll have deeper connections. Now, I'll give you the flip side of this. If you find yourself in a conversation and you want to get out of it as quickly as possible, like adjust your rate of speech to be the opposite of the person you're in conversation with, and they'll want to end that conversation with you quickly.
So essentially, Nikki, what you just did is you gave us dating advice. If you like the person, match the rate of speech. If you want to get out of this, you change it up. I love this. It's so simple, but so powerful. I just did an interview with Gary Nessner, the lead hostage negotiator or FBI negotiator for the Waco crisis back in the day.
Oh.
And he said in his experience, learning from the greatest negotiators, there's one thing that everybody has in common, and that was likability. Every good negotiator is likable. And that it was really fascinating to me because I realized that too. And this is such an easy way to get people to like you, because we always think about, what do I need to do to get people to like me? Do I need to be a people pleaser? Do I need to compromise inappropriately? Do I need to compliment them when I don't believe it? Flattery, those type of things. This is so simple. You just need to be you, but a little bit faster or a little bit slower. And there are going to be times where you increase your rate of speech naturally. There are going to be times where you decrease your rate of speech naturally. So most likely, this little flex is going to be still within your authentic range of communication. And when you talk about similarity, really what we're talking about is affinity bias. So I see you as like me, right? And so the more like the other person you can be, you can seem, the more they are going to like you. And this is a good way to do that without compromising your values, your position, or anything like this. It's like, hey, we speak the same rate of speech and it's subconscious. They're not even going to recognize it, which I think is one of those things that makes you a lot more persuasive too. And then the last point, when we're thinking about trust, one of the things that helps people to trust you more is competence. Does this person seem competent? And sometimes we might be strategically trying to demonstrate our competence, or out of insecurity, we might be trying to read through our resume and show people we're competent. But again, this is a simple way of showing that we're competent in the eyes of the other person without having to seem arrogant by reading through all of our accomplishments. So this is a really, really strong start.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I actually just got, right before I started this conversation with you, I was having a conversation with somebody else for her podcast. And before we started recording, she said to me, gosh, I really like you, Nikki. I really like you. And so of course I'm super flattered by that. But there's a part of me in my brain that's going, it's probably because I'm making some adjustments here, not big ones. I'm not pretending to be something I'm not. I'm just paying attention to her and her energy and how she's showing up. And I'm just willing to adjust mine a little bit. And it was that fast that she was like, I really like you. And I was like, great. And we're going to have a great conversation. And we really did. Right. So it smooths the waters. It calms the waters. Right. So that's, I love the rate of speech one.
Absolutely. This is good. So let's give us another one. What else is something that we could do?
So the other thing I think is really important is to learn how to ask questions versus always making statements. Now I'll say that I bring this into my my work all the time. You can make a lot of statements at people, but most of us are so sick of being talked at. But you can actually have the same impact, but do it in a way that is a question that now can allow the other person to decide how they feel about something or whether they agree with something versus making a statement. So I can say to somebody, for instance, when you hire me, this is, imagine when you hire me, you're going to feel so much more confident when you're in your sales conversations, right? I could make that as a statement, or I could say, now, would you benefit from feeling more confident in your sales conversations? Is that something you're looking for? So just by framing it as a question, it allows for you to go, yeah, that is something I'm looking for. And now you feel more inclined to want to continue the conversation with me, because why would I ask that question if I didn't know that I could do that for you? Right. So it helps plant seeds. So I love questions. I think questions are one of the most impactful ways to build relationship with people. I also think what you tell me, because you're really the expert on negotiations, but I think usually the person who's asking questions tends to hold the power in a conversation. So if you're asking questions, now the other person's in the position. And I don't mean like you're on the witness stand, like answer me all my questions, but it's like, let's build connection and you get to share about you, because most of us are more interested in ourselves than we are in the other person. So if you want to build connection with somebody, let them see how interested you are in them and ask questions instead of make statements.
I agree 100%. And sometimes people ask, hey, Kwame, what kind of negotiator are you? What kind of approach do you use? Those type of things. And I just say, listen to my podcast. This is how I do it. I like the same methodology that I use in a negotiation is really similar to the way that I handle a podcast, because this is a great example, because I'm controlling the conversation because I'm asking the questions. You're the one who's talking and giving all of the answers. Same thing in the negotiation. You want to have that type of ratio where the other person's talking more. You're getting more information, which is beneficial, but then also the person feels good, because most of the time people aren't good listeners. It's like, wow, I'm talking to somebody who's listening to me. This is incredible. It's so validating. So absolutely, questions are so powerful. I think this is really why do I say I think it is? The methodology that I use for my difficult conversations is compassionate curiosity. It's all based in that curiosity. It's very question based. So yeah, it's really interesting now that you're saying this, Nikki, because I'm realizing that a lot of what people come onto the podcast and talk about, it is NLP. We just don't call it NLP.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you and I have a mutual connection, Melina Palmer, who's, behavioral economist, and shout out for Melina. She's absolutely amazing. And we have a lot of similarities in the things, like she comes from this behavioral economist standpoint with all of this research and studies behind it. I come from my NLP background, and oftentimes Melina and I are saying like, oh, in BE, as she refers to it, it's like, that's this theory. And I'm thinking like, okay, so in NLP, this is matching and mirroring, or this is, anchoring. And, although they use anchoring also in behavioral economics, but it's just, there's a lot of similarities, a lot of crossover in these conversations. So you might be, somebody who's listening might be like, oh, well, we learned a version of that in my psychology class. And I'm going, well, I learned it in my NLP class. The thing is does it work? Does it work? Does it make an impact? And however you want to label it, as long as you're doing it with a high level of integrity and you're building connection with people, that I think is where you're going to see success in relationships, in business, in life.
100%. 100%. This is great. So asking questions, and one last note to the listeners too. One of the challenges that I have for you all, because this has been really helpful for me, is whenever you think of a statement that you want to make, what I like to do is try to force myself to turn that into a question of some sort, because like you said, we're planting seeds, and sometimes I might make a statement has no impact or perceptible impact at that moment. But if I were to turn that into a question, it's like it's like it plants this seed, and it might not lead them to change their perspective in that very moment, but it causes them to put their brain in a different place. So they go to a different place. When somebody asks a question, even if you don't answer it verbally, your brain addresses it, right? But it's easy to be defensive and just shut down statements without really giving it full consideration.
Yeah. And that brings me to, I don't know if this is even interesting for us to talk about, so we can ignore it, but do you talk about polarity response at all? Is that something?
Let's do it today.
Okay. So the reason I bring it up is because just what you had said about like, it might not land for somebody if you're making a statement. So in NLP, a polarity response is, an example of it is like, you say yes, the other person says no. You say black, they say white. You say love, they say hate. It's like they take the opposite view of whatever it is that you say. By the way, we all have a polarity response. Some of these people have, like, they live in your home and they have a really high polarity response to you. Sometimes it's context specific. Sometimes it's relationship specific as to when the polarity response arises. And for some people, it's become a behavioral, like an everyday behavioral trait. So if you say to somebody, this is a super basic example, but you say to somebody, you know, like, hey, I was thinking we should have Italian tonight for dinner. And they go, Italian? Really? I was really thinking we should have Thai. Like, it doesn't matter what you would have said. They would have said some other version. But when you learn how to recognize somebody who has a polarity response to you or to the conversation that you're having, you can change up the way that you frame. Instead of saying, like, I think we should have Italian, you could go, you probably aren't in the mood for Italian tonight, because they want to now take the opposite. So they'll say, well, Italian doesn't sound so bad, right? Because now the opposite isn't like, not Italian. It's like, oh no, actually, I do like Italian. Let's have Italian tonight. So when you think about in a conversation with somebody who has a very high polarity response to, again, something you're saying, or just the conversation or the context of what you're talking about. And I had this example. I learned about polarity response many, many years ago studying NLP, and I had the owner of our largest customer when I was working for a really big company. This was they did $130 million a year with our company. So the owner, he had a very high polarity response. So anything you came to him and you're like, hey, I have an idea, super excited to share it with you, he would say, no, won't work. And so when I learned that this was just kind of his natural go-to, I would go to him and I would say, so I have this idea, but I'm not even sure it would work. And he'd be like, tell me the idea. And then I would tell him, and I'm like, but I don't know. I don't even know if this is something you would even explore. And he'd be like, let me tell you how we're going to do it. And then it would become his idea. And then he would find the solution. And ultimately, it wasn't about me. And I want to say really clearly, if he didn't like the idea, it wasn't like he was going to agree to it. But he'd be more open to exploring it if I could frame it in a different way. So framing is super important in your language, and specifically of bringing in some NLP to it. How do you frame something to somebody so that they are being more open to hearing it? And then they can find a solution. I had a client who had a really high polarity response. She would always like, Nikki, give me 5 ideas of things I can do right now to bring more money into my business. And I would find that every time I'd I would throw out an idea, she'd be like, nope, won't work. Didn't, nope. Mm-mm. So I just realized, okay, so she's got this high polarity. So when she would ask me for these things, I would say, now, I'm going to throw out these ideas and I'm going to throw them out really fast. And I just want you to knock them down as fast as you can. Like, tell me immediately it won't work so that we can just move on. So then I would throw out an idea and she'd be like, let me think about that one. And then she would slow down enough to like consider it. Doesn't mean she's necessarily going to do it, but she's much more open to now taking in the information, as long as I was telling her, like, reject it as fast as possible. Because her polarity response is, I'm not going to reject it as fast as possible. I'm going to consider it.
There are 2 great philosophers who actually introduced the concept of polarity to the masses. One is named Daffy, and the other one is named Bugs. You think about the old Looney Tunes, rabbit season, duck season. And then they would switch it up. That's what this sounds like to me. It makes so much sense. I really love this, because I think as you were saying this, I think everybody was saying, oh, I know exactly who that is in my life. We all have people who respond in this way. And in the mediation world, there's a concept called reactive devaluation. And the way that I describe it is, this is the just because you said it, I don't believe it bias.
Yes.
And so what they find in mediation is that sometimes if one of the parties has an idea that we believe is acceptable, we make sure that the other party doesn't send that message. It goes through the mediator, and the mediator presents it as their own idea, and it makes it more tolerable. But in this situation, if we're negotiating, a lot of times let's assume we don't have the benefit of a third party to float the idea. We have to do it ourselves. And we realize there's a polarity response as it relates to us in this situation. Okay, so I know they're going to disagree with me, so let me frame it differently. And I love the way that you described it. We are asking ourselves, and I think we should just ask ourselves this in general, even if there's not a polarity response, but in general, how should I frame this message in a way that will make them more open to it. And the key word there is open,
Yeah.
because a lot of times we're making these really, really, really great points to somebody who is not at all receptive. We haven't taken the time to open them up so they can actually receive the message. And so this is a really powerful methodology that I think we could use in almost all of our conversations.
I use it quite often. And when you start to recognize, I have somebody who lives in my home that has a high polarity response, right? And I also have learned, and this is again back from my NLP background, I've learned that he likes to take his time to make big decisions, right? Like I'm a quick start on the Colby, like you put something in front of me, I can probably make a decision about it. Yes, no, let's go, or I'm not in, right? Like it's super fast. But any big decisions in his life, it takes about a year. I've learned this after being together, being with my significant other now we're coming up on our 20th year. So, I've learned. And I'm willing to put that time in. And so I'll do this. I'll say like, gosh, I don't even know that this is something we should even be thinking about or talking about. And I just plant that little seed, right? And then, within a year, a lot of times he comes back to me and he's like, you know what we should do? I'm like, what? And he'll like tell me this thing that I'm like, I don't think we should do that. And then I'm like, that's such a great idea. Let's go. Let's do that, And so it's willing to invest in the relationship. And again, it's not, and I want to be really clear, it's not like I can say 100% if my significant other is an absolute no to something, it's not my job is to not try to convince him to change his mind. My job is just to see, is he open? Is he open to considering? And if he's open, and if he decides that this is his idea and that this is the way we should do something, I don't really care how we get there, because for me, it's about outcome. And this is very NLP too. It's like, what's your outcome? What do you ultimately want to happen? And if I ultimately want this to happen, as long as we get there, I don't care how we got there. I don't need the credit for it. I just need to know that we're moving in that direction.
Now, the point that you just made is very rational. And most people would say, yes, I agree. The outcome is important. Then in practice, our ego gets in the way. And then we're like, no, I want to persuade this person, but I want to persuade them my way. I'm going to talk as fast as I want, and I'm going to be as, polarizing as possible in this process. And I think what we're realizing is that there's a specific type of mindset that needs to go along with these types of strategies, because if you're too arrogant, then you're not going to be willing to adjust. But it's like you said at the beginning, if you're flexible, you can bend without breaking. But if you're really rigid, then you have one very narrow path to victory. And then when you run into resistance, then you're not willing to go into your bag of tricks because you're not persuading in the way that you want to persuade. And so I think that's a really important point for us to remember. We have to keep our mind focused on the big picture. What is it that we ultimately want to accomplish? And then also recognize that our ego can get in the way of accomplishing that goal too.
Absolutely. And there's no doubt that my ego does get in the way. I'm not always at my best, right? Like I learned this through NLP too, like your performance will be within a range. Some days when I'm really at my best, when I'm firing on all cylinders and I've got like, I'm well rested, well fed, well hydrated, all that good stuff. I might be at an 8 or a 9, but there are other days where, I'm at like a 2 or a 3. And the one thing I have learned is that sometimes it's not about trying to always get to be the 8 or 9. I'm just trying to be the best 3 I can be on certain days. It doesn't mean my ego won't get in the way. It doesn't mean I won't be perfect, or, I'm not going to necessarily say the right thing. But I also think about, and again, going back to the stuff that you study in NLP, they say the foundation of NLP is rapport. So everything is built on rapport. And I always think I have a rapport bank account with every single person I come into contact with. And on most days, my goal is always to make deposits in that account because I want to build up a balance, because there will be days where I'm at a 3 or a 2 or 1 if I'm like really at my worst, and I'm going to make a withdrawal. And if I have a balance built up, like that person will still probably give me some grace. But if you're just meeting somebody for the first time and you make a withdrawal from an account that's empty, that chances are you don't get a second chance, right? So how can you show up and make deposits over and over and over again in every relationship, in every contact? And I'm going to say that's really ultimately how I use NLP in my life is, am I making deposits?
This is great. And I think one of the best things about this is that it is very doable. All of these things are very doable. And so, no, this isn't wizardry. It's just science. That's all it is. So Nikki, I'm glad you were able to come on the pod today and share your wisdom with us. And before you go, can you let the listeners know about your podcast, your business, and how they can get in touch?
Yes, thank you so much. So the podcast is called Sales Maven. It is individual episodes where I'm doing sales techniques, teaching sales techniques. I do on-air coaching calls on there. So you get to be a fly on the wall and listen to, how other people are getting advice to move forward. And then I do a Mastering Excellence series where I dig into the unconscious competence. That's really the NLP piece that I bring in. So get to dig into somebody's unconscious competence and what are the things that they get exceptional results at so that you can hear structure. So that's the Sales Maven podcast. And if you're interested in being connected, I'd love to wrap it around a gift for your listener. So if you're interested in sales and you'd like to learn how to use some of these techniques in your sales conversations, I have an ebook called Closing the Sale. You can grab it by going to yoursalesmaven.com/Kwame. So this is specific for your audience. And then we'll be connected.
Cool. Thank you so much, Nikki. This was great and can't wait to have you back on because I feel like we are just scratching the surface of NLP. So thanks for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thanks for having me.
You've just heard one powerful perspective, and now we're moving on to the next. A fresh voice with a new angle on the same challenge so you can keep expanding your skills. Let's dive in.
Hey everyone, it's Kwame Christian, host of Negotiate Anything, asking you to please do not skip forward because this is not a commercial. Okay, I've got something for you. So we want to hear from you, our incredible listeners, because your feedback is super helpful in making the show even better. We've created a quick and fun form to get to know you, and this is your chance to make the show even closer to what you love. And here's the best part. If you fill out the form before December 31st, 2024, you'll be entered into a raffle to win a signed copy of my book delivered straight to your door. It only takes a few minutes, and your input will help to shape the future of Negotiate Anything. Find the form in the description of this episode, and we'll announce the winner in January. Who knows? It might be you. Thanks for helping us to make the show even better and even more connected to you. Good luck in the raffle. Jonathan, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me here, Kwame.
Hey, it's my pleasure, man. So how about you get us started by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Jonathan Mahan. I'm co-founder of a company called The Practice Lab. What we've really done is we've gone and looked at what other disciplines are doing, what professional athletes do, what musicians do, what Olympics teams do to grow their skill and improve performance time behavior. And we've taken all those techniques and applied them to the world of sales and sales training so that salespeople can actually grow their skills and sharpen their skills in the same way that those other disciplines do. I got to say, I've been doing this a couple of years now. It's just been so fun and interesting to go through the process of taking something that was born in another discipline and trying to find ways to work it into the world of sales, which is what I've been doing for the last 10 years. And it's an industry I know and love. And it's been so interesting to do it. And of course, really encouraging too, as we've seen that this practice approach works every bit as well in sales as it does everywhere else. So that's it's kind of my background for the last few years.
I love it. And listeners, you could probably hear the glee in my voice as I introduce Jonathan. And it's because we had a nice little practice session of the first about 7 minutes of the podcast because we had some audio issues. And so this is our second time going through it. So listeners, check out how sharp this question is going to be. It's going to sound really organic too. So Jonathan, I have a question for you. Now that we're talking about practice, I'm realizing that folks who are in professional disciplines like sales, negotiation, or leadership in general, where we're communicating all the time, I think one of the biggest disconnects that they have is that they don't have a really great or strong understanding of what practice really means in the context of communication. So let's start off with some of the common misconceptions that people have about practice before we actually get into what it really means in this context.
Wow, such a deja vu moment. It came out even better the second time, though, thanks to your practice.
Thank you.
So that's a really good question, Kwame. And honestly, I think there's some misconceptions that really stop people from even getting started with practice. And the biggest misconception that I also had early in my career is that all practice is like rehearsal, like an actor rehearsing their lines, which means that the only time you can use practice is when you're heading into a really predictable conversation where you know what they're going to say and you know what you're supposed to say, and then you can practice it. But practice goes so much deeper than that, goes so much further than that. And we can kind of see this by looking at other disciplines too, because there's a lot of other disciplines where people do spend time practicing, even though they're heading into an unpredictable situation, right? Great example of this is like martial artists. They don't know what their opponent's going to do. They don't know what moves they're going to face. They don't know anything that's going to happen once they get on that mat. But they still practice, right? They practice the individual moves to make sure they're fluid and second nature and they can perform them flawlessly. They practice giving their brain the experience of reading an opponent and making snap-second decisions about, what move to use next. And they still use practice to sharpen their skills, to grow their brain's ability to perform so that when they get into that unpredictable situation, they can perform better. So practice goes far beyond just rehearsal and practicing your lines, so to speak. And practice really involves sharpening and strengthening your brain so that your brain can perform better under pressure.
I love this. It's so true. It's so true. And I think something else in addition to all of those things is that sometimes people get to that point where they reach the okay plateau where they say, all right, I am good enough at this skill. I've been in leadership for 10, 15, 20 years. I've been doing okay. I've been advancing in my career. Why do I need to improve my negotiation skills? Why do I need to improve my ability to communicate and resolve conflict? So can you help us to understand the payoff that comes with practice compared to just continuing to float along without dedicating practice to these skills?
I mean, of course, the first question is, do you want to get better? And there may be some times where you look at your role and you look at your life and you say, I actually am as good as I need to be, so no need to practice, right? So practice really applies when you are in a place where you realize, I either absolutely need to get better or I at least strongly want to get better. But in terms of why it's better to use practice than just to go through your day-to-day life and pick up experience and get better as you go, is simply a matter of time, right? Getting your experience and growing your skill through just doing the job, doing the task is a very, very slow way to grow skill compared to practicing outside of performance time is a very fast way to grow skill. And actually, if you want, I can kind of unpack why that is.
Absolutely. Let's get into it.
Yeah. So really, there's two modes your brain can operate in, either the performance mode or the improvement mode. When your brain is in the performance mode, its goal is pretty straightforward. Do the very best that we can do in this moment. And when you are in a real life situation, a real negotiation, a real conversation with a subordinate, a real sales call, right? Your brain is always going to be in that performance mode where the goal is to do the very best we can at this moment with the skills we have now. So what tends to happen when your brain's in the performance mode is it goes to doing whatever its current best is. So day in and day out, call after call, all you're doing is whatever your current best is. So whatever your current best is actually becoming more permanent. And it actually becomes harder to change your behavior and behave differently after you've had tons and tons of repetition of your current best. So typically, if your approach to growing a skill is just, well, I'll just, practice on my sales calls or practice on my real negotiations, you'll find that journey to growing your skill is very slow because your brain is just focused on doing whatever your current best is. And all that really happens is your current best becomes more permanent, right? You might add little small 1% improvements here and there as you go, but not a whole ton. So it's a very slow process. It takes people 10 years, right, to get to a point of, real expertise. Whereas if you're using focused, deliberate practice and your brain is in the improvement zone is very different. In the improvement zone, the brain isn't necessarily focused on doing the very best we can at this moment. The brain is focused on getting better. And sometimes in order to get better, you need to try something new that you haven't done before that feels a little weird and awkward and doesn't land right. And then you got to back up and try it again and see if you can do it better. When you're in the performance zone, you tend to not have the luxury of time. Someone hits you with an objection, you've got maybe a 1 or 2 second pause to take a deep breath, and then you got to hit them with the best response you got, which again is probably going to be the same as what your best response was last time you got that objection, right? Because it's your current best that you've got. Whereas in the improvement zone, you have that ability to slow down, to pause and to think, okay, what did I just hear? What are my options that I have for how I could respond? What are the pros and cons of each option? Let's try this one. Ooh, that didn't feel good. Let's back up and try that again. Let's try this one. Ah, yes, that felt better. And now suddenly your brain is actually handling a situation differently. It's experimenting, it's learning, it's filling out its patterns and mental models of how the world works. And it's actually learning things it never learned before, doing things it never did before. And suddenly you can start to change your behavior and grow skill and take things that were always theoretical things you learned on a page and turn them into things that are really baked into your brain's networks and you're able to do. So the power of practice is that it allows your brain to be in that improvement zone where, again, it can slow down, where it's safe to make mistakes, where it can make different choices, where it can be more aware than it normally is when it's just in that improvement zone. Than when it's in the performance zone. So when you are in the improvement zone, you can dramatically accelerate the process of growing and building skill compared to when you're just always at performance time, hoping you'll get better from repetition alone.
I love this because as I was listening, I'm sure other listeners had this same revelation. Once you said it, it's like, duh. Because if you imagine being a coach of any type of sports team, they're just not like, hey, go play the sport. That's not practice. They're just not throwing somebody a ball and say play, right? We actually have dedicated time for specific skills, honing those skills. And this is beneficial for me, even as a negotiation trainer. I have a training that I'm doing tomorrow, and I give people simulations a lot of times. I like this idea of injecting a little bit of time because, like you said, if we are in our performance mode, we're just going back and forth with what we're comfortable with and familiar with. But now I'm going to give them the instruction to say, hey, if you're not exactly sure what to say next, take as much time as you need and try to utilize something that you learned from the training. So I appreciate that little gem. This is really important because we're recognizing that these small tweaks in our mentality or in our philosophy and our approach to learning these skills can have a massive impact when it comes to the growth that we experience after going through dedicated and intentional practice.
Yeah. And intentional practice is the key phrase there, because I found that repetition alone doesn't grow skill. Whether that repetition comes during game time or that repetition comes through some half-ass awkward role play your manager makes you do, right? Simple repetition doesn't grow skill. Think about it this way. If simple repetition grew skill, by the time people reach the age of like 65 to 70, they would be expert drivers because they would have gotten their 10,000 hours in of driving. Anyone who's driven in Florida knows that 65 to 70-year-olds are not expert drivers. So simple repetition does not grow skill, right? I'm no better at tying my shoes now than I was when I was 12 years old, even though I've had so many repetitions at it. So to have practice benefits, you have to be more than repetition. There has to be that awareness going into it of what exactly you're trying to do here, what good looks like and what you're aiming for. There needs to be a chance to, of course, practice in the improvement zone where there isn't this pressure to perform and where you do have the benefit of some space to think things out. But then there needs to be immediate reflection on what just happened and measuring it against that standard of that you had in mind going into it. You got to highlight maybe where your performance missed the mark. And then you try again. And try to implement that feedback, whether it's feedback you gave yourself or feedback a partner gave you. Try to immediately implement it again and see how that feels. And do this back to back over and over. And your brain can very quickly start to, again, learn new patterns and pick things up that it didn't used to have before. But what I see all too often happening when people do some kind of role play, whether it's sales or negotiation, is like, there's no clarity going into it as to what good looks like. It's just like, hey, I'll hit you with an objection and just give me your best response. And then they'll get a little bit of feedback on something that could be better. And then they'll move on. And there's no chance to implement that feedback. There's no chance to try doing it again differently to give the brain a chance to really feel what the difference is between doing it the first way and doing it the second way. Because that's where the real learning comes, right? The real skill growth happens is when your brain has a chance to actually experience firsthand what the right way feels like compared to what the wrong way feels like. But just getting a list of feedback from somebody for things to try next time doesn't give your brain that ability to really experience firsthand, again, what it feels like to do it the right way. So intentional practice is important, and the way you structure it matters. And in the work we do with sales teams, we've even identified that depending on the situation you're in and depending on the type of skill you're trying to master, there's even 4 entirely different types of practice that you can use that might best fit the circumstance.
Well, let's talk about that. Tease us here, Jonathan. What are the 4 different types of practice?
Yeah. So for the most predictable moments, we use something called word practice. And that is actually kind of similar to what I mentioned at the top of the episode, where you know going into it roughly what you might hear, and you know going into it roughly what you want to say. So of course, lots of things don't fit this type of practice, but there are a lot of predictable moments. For example, if you're in sales, at some point this quarter, you're going to hear someone say, we're going to have to push this back 6 months. How are you going to respond? Are you going to immediately jump in with a kind of a pushback response of, hey, wait a minute, no, we can't do that. Here's why you can't do that. That tends to not work too well. It raises defenses, spoils the relationship, gets people to close their mind off, and that doesn't really work. Or you could have maybe more of a flight response where you just say, okay, yeah, sounds good. I'll talk to you in 6 months, where you're almost like fleeing the conflict altogether. But neither of those are great reactions. So you can practice what your reaction is in that moment to that specific objection. So that's word practice. And again, it's useful for those more predictable moments where you know someone's going to say something like this, and you know your response should be something like this. Another type of practice we call situation practice. This is a little bit more dynamic, where you don't necessarily know exactly what you're going to say going into it, because what you say depends on what your partner's saying. So you have to adapt to what's there. An example of this is a really good behavior, whether you're selling or negotiating, is to occasionally summarize back to your party what they heard or what you heard, but using slightly different language and maybe even making a few inferences. It's a really good behavior you get in, but it's actually kind of hard work to do for the brain to A, keep track of everything it's hearing and not forget what it's heard, but also find the through lines, create a nice condensed summary, find ways to rephrase it, and again, make some inferences in there as well. That's kind of actually a cognitively very difficult thing to do. So a version of situation practice is where you could have a conversation with your partner, do that work of keeping track of their main points, finding out what the through line between it is, finding a way to rephrase it and throw a few inferences in there, and then regurgitate it back to them and say, hey, how do you think my summary was? We call that situation practice because you can't do that without a partner. And what you say is entirely dependent on what the partner says, right? Word practice, you could actually do on your own with a mirror. You don't even need a partner for word practice. For situation practice, you need to kind of feed off of what that person's saying. Another example of situation practice is Chris Voss in his book, Never Split the Difference, talks about specific behaviors of like mirroring and labeling. So when you hear something, use labels like it seems like, it sounds like, it feels like. Or when you hear them use a key word, just mirror it back to them and say, difficulties? To get them to talk more. That was a beautiful opportunity for situation practice where you just have a conversation with your partner and wherever you can, throw in a mirror, throw in a label. So it's still kind of a role play setting where they're pretending to be a buyer, you're pretending to be a seller, and it's very dependent on what they say. So those again are good for less predictable moments, but still fairly predictable moments, we'll say. It's good situation practice. The third type of practice we found is really good. It's called skills practice. This is personally my favorite because with skills practice, you completely throw out role playing and pretending. You even step away from the context of sales and negotiations, and you just focus on core, fundamental human skills, communication skills, and brain abilities. Good analogy of this, that there's a football team out there, I forget which one, but they actually have their linebackers train as boxers during the off season. Not because they want them throwing punches on the field or anything, but because when you train as a boxer, it strengthens the neural connections between your hands and your brain. It makes your hands faster. It makes them more accurate and more agile. And of course, linebackers need to have accurate, agile hands. So you can do the same thing when it comes to negotiation. You can focus on what are the abilities I want my brain to have. Maybe it's listening. Maybe it's reading body language. Maybe it's managing your own emotions under stress. You can pick up those skills in any context. It doesn't have to be a fake role play negotiation for you to grow those skills. In fact, it's usually better if you're in a real conversation that isn't pretend, and you use that conversation to grow those skills and abilities in your brain. And then once you step into the sales arena again, or the negotiation arena, you tend to perform much better because you've taken the time to train your brain. So I love that type of practice. And the fourth one, we actually don't have a great name for it yet. We call it mental practice, but it's where you actually take recordings of real conversations, whether they're yours, a colleague's, or else some stranger off the internet, but real negotiations, and you play it. And whenever the partner, right, your buyer, if you're a sales context, whenever they say something pivotal or important, you pause the tape and you make your brain go through the process of thinking about what it just heard, choosing what direction you want to take the conversation, and then picking a specific question to ask in that moment to direct the conversation that way. So this is, again, you could do it alone in a room. You don't need a partner for this. You're just training your brain. But rather than using a fictitious scenario of a role play partner, you're using a real life scenario saying, if I was the seller in this moment, if I was the lawyer in this moment, how would I handle this situation? And it forces your brain to think through that, make those choices, make those decisions, which again is training your brain to perform well under pressure. So 4 entirely different types of practice, again, depending on the situation and how predictable it is, with, of course, those last 2 I mentioned of skills practice and mental practice being great for the stuff that is less predictable, right? Those can be great ways to practice. So that was a lot. I'm going to take a deep breath there, Kwame.
This was a masterclass in practice because these 4 elements of practice are so powerful. And I think even beyond the power of each strategy or methodology of practice is being able to give names to them, label them, so we could actually do it with intentionality. So we have the word practice. So this is specific situations, understanding that you have to say specific things, and you could do that by yourself. We have situation practice, which is these are more dynamic. So you need a partner to practice these types of skills. And then we have skills practice in particular. So we're talking about the core fundamental human skills and brain abilities that work in the negotiation context. And then we have the mental practice. And I love this. Whitney and I do this when it comes to watching reality TV and nonsense on Netflix, because it's like, okay, listen, there's no pedagogical benefit to watching these shows, but we're going to make one. So I'll commentate. I'll be like, oh, did you see the inflection? Did you see the change of the tone? This was a point. They should have done this. But of course, they put fuel on the fire. Let's watch, get the popcorn, right?
Here's a fun exercise for that specifically. Pause the movie or the TV show and ask yourself, what is that person thinking right now? Beautiful exercise in empathy and being, okay, someone over here just said this inflammatory thing. What is the people in the room? What are they thinking right now? Just trains your brain to get out of your own perspective and more easily adopt the perspective of another, which again is one of those hugely important abilities for negotiation, to drop your own perspective and step into someone else's. But who knew you could practice that brain ability with reality TV?
I love it. I love it. Everybody listening to the podcast is like, listen, get the Netflix subscription again. Time to learn. This is great. This is great. Let's wrap up with some of these everyday scenarios that we can turn into practice opportunities. These are all around us, but you really have a really cool approach to this. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So, those 4 types of practice that I mentioned above, right? That's what we bring to sales teams. Actually, on that note, there is a exercise practice blueprint that we've built that people can run without us even being there, which will give people a chance to try out that situation practice I mentioned in the context of responding to some common objections. So this will be really valuable to sales teams who face probably those exact objections, but probably be useful to anyone who does negotiation. And again, is used to hearing things like, hey, my boss said no, or hey, can we put this on ice for 6 months, right? So there's actually an exercise that we have. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, but that'll be kind of a free giveaway for your listeners where you can do this with your own team. However, in general, I recognize that for a lot of people here, they might be solopreneurs who don't have a team to practice with. They might be on a team where none of their colleagues are really supportive of practice, or they might just feel like they just can't possibly carve out the time for practice. I would encourage you to do it anyways, but some people that might be a barrier for them. So if that's the case, there are a handful of ways, there's really a lot of ways that you can practice these core foundational brain abilities in your real life. Things that are already happening to you today, just change the way you engage in that conversation, and you can use it as a practice opportunity. So I got 4 specific examples in mind, but if you can imagine this, there's many more. So here's one. It strengthens the ability that you have to really get people to open up. Because of course, in negotiation, oftentimes people are a bit standoffish, whether they're specifically trying to hide something or whether they're just not in the mood to share the details of their business with you. It can be really good to learn those skills of how to use simple questions to get people to open up. So a real life situation where you can use this is when you're picking up your kids from school, trying to get them to tell you about their day. Because I'm telling you, no matter what age, you ask a kid, how was school? You get the same answer every time. Good. What'd you do? I don't know. What'd you learn? I don't know. So you got to learn how to be more specific with your questions. You got to learn how to use intonation to create a little bit more curiosity, a little more intrigue, right? You need to learn how to control, or how to work with both, simple close-ended, easy to ask questions like, did you have gym today? With more open-ended, maybe harder to think about questions like, what was something that made you bored today? Did you have any moments where you were bored? Or do you have anything funny happen at lunch, right? But that's just a real life situation. If you can get your kid talking to you in detail about how their day was, you are really good at using simple words and tones to open people up. Second one, training your ability to really get curious, especially get curious in the face of conflict and disagreement, right? Because oftentimes our most natural reaction when we hear conflict and a different opinion or something is to try to overcome it, try to change someone's mind. But oftentimes the key to moving forward is to slowing down and taking the time to really understand their perspective and their worldview before you jump in with your perspective and your worldview. So a great opportunity for this is when you're having those conversations with your partner, right? So for me, it's my wife. And when I'm talking to her, oftentimes we'll be making a decision like, where do we go on vacation? Or how should we do the landscaping in our yard? Or what should the boundaries around TV time be for the kids? And she'll say something that is just so preposterous and so idiotic and so wrong that all I can do is just stare at her, cock my head to the side and say, are you serious? That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. As you can imagine, the conversation doesn't go very well from there. When you have those moments happen, that's a perfect opportunity to fight back that reaction. Instead, get curious and make it your intention to use questions to fully map out and fully understand their perspective, their worldview, how they came to that conclusion. Chris Voss, in his book, Never Split the Difference, talks about the power of the phrase, that's right. When you can get your counterpart to say, yeah, that's right. That's when you know you really understand them. And that's a breakthrough moment in negotiation is when you understand them and they know you understand them and they felt understood. So make it a challenge of yours for yourself. Next time you have a run-in with your partner and you very much disagree on things and you just can't understand their perspective, make it your goal over the next 20 minutes, half hour, whatever it takes to ask them questions until you thoroughly understand their situation, their perspective. You can verbalize it to them, get them to say, that's right. Exactly. You've got it. If you can get to that point, A, you just avoided an argument and strengthened your relationship. B, you've just strengthened your negotiation skills. Should I keep going?
Keep going, man. I'm taking all these notes. I'm loving this. Yeah. So what's next?
Cool. So another really, really important brain ability is the ability to hear things that trigger strong emotional reactions in your brain, but not let those emotions cloud your judgment, not let those emotions drive the bus, so to speak, right? So again, in a negotiation, this is someone saying, yeah, I don't think this is going to work out. Or this is someone saying, you're way too expensive. You're going to have to do this for half the cost. When you hear those things, your brain has an emotional reaction. And your ability to move forward depends to a large extent to your ability to manage that emotional reaction, tone it down, and focus on the matter at hand, which is typically a matter of asking good questions, understanding their perspective, etc. So one of the great ways to develop this skill is to intentionally talk to someone where you know things they're going to say are going to create a strong emotional reaction in you. Easiest way to find these people, find someone on the very far end, opposite end of the political spectrum from you and talk to them about political topics. Most people would go white as a sheet when they think about this. But if you're, far left liberal, go talk to the most right-wing conservative person you know, or vice versa. Talk to them about those hot button issues of politics and money and immigration and gay rights and whatever kind of issues you guys disagree on. Talk to them. Your intention here is not to change their mind. Your intention here is simply to better understand their world. And more importantly, your intention is to manage your own emotional reactions, because there's going to be a lot of things they say in that conversation that cause some really strong reactions in you. But this is a beautiful opportunity for you to train your brain to take that emotion, set it aside, focus on the task at hand, which is understanding their perspective, right? I actually had a podcast called Courageous Conversations that I did for like a year in 2021. And that podcast helped me become a better seller more than anything else I've ever done. Had nothing to do with selling, right? It was me and a bunch of people I disagreed with strongly, talking about race, talking about religion, talking about sexuality. And yet it trained my brain in how to get curious, how to listen, how to manage my own emotions. And it made me a much better seller. So as terrifying as it sounds, I encourage you to do that. Next family reunion, right? Your neighbor, whoever it is that you disagree with, use the opportunity to train your brain. And just the last one, also kind of in that area of nerves. I know a lot of times going into negotiations, right? People just are wrecked with nerves, right? And they're just so nervous. Their whole body is feeling it. It makes them hard for them to prep, makes it hard for them to perform. One way you can train your brain on how to respond better to that is to intentionally do things that make you nervous involving humans, human communication, human interactions. An example of this is for most people, the idea of walking up to someone in a Starbucks who's sitting there and sitting down next to them and saying, hey, can we have a conversation? Or, hey, would you mind if I sit with you? For most people, that's absolutely freaking terrifying. The thought of doing that, right? I can just picture for myself, if I was actually going to do that, standing there in Starbucks, looking at that person and being like, oh boy, I'm going to do it. The sweat would be pouring out of me. My stomach would be twisting in knots. I'd be breathing hard. That's an opportunity to train your brain though on how to handle that, feel it, set it aside, move forward, do it anyways. Do that half a dozen times and suddenly your brain isn't quite so nervous. And then when you're getting on your next negotiation call, you don't have quite the same amount of nerves going into it. So there's many more examples I imagine, but those were kind of a few I thought up of in advance of this show that again, can really help you to strengthen your brain and practice negotiation skills, even outside the context of practicing with colleagues and anything like that.
Absolutely. This is strong. This is really strong because I believe just incorporating a handful of these, just incorporating one of these tools is something that could absolutely change the game for people. And imagine if you were to try to just dedicate a day or a week to one of the things that Jonathan suggested, and then the next day or the next week trying another thing, those type of little micro experiments and just creating your own opportunities to improve your skills. This is powerful and it can pay massive dividends to you for the rest of your life. I was going to say career, but I think that's too limited because these are everyday skills that will apply in life, but also in business. So Jonathan, I really appreciate this. And before you go, I want to give you an opportunity again to shout out your business, your company, things that you're working on, and make sure you let the listeners know about that freebie again too.
Yeah, for sure. So the name of the company is The Practice Lab. So our website is thepracticelab.co. .com is actually something totally different, unrelated business. So .co will get you to us. And again, we work with sales teams to give sales teams a chance to practice these skills that we've mentioned today in a way that's really easy for them, really easy for management, right? Really light lift for everyone all around, but ultimately grows to the kind of record skill development that other disciplines have tapped into to grow a lot of skill in a hurry. And it's much, much quicker than traditional sales training or much, much quicker than letting your reps just kind of figure it out on their own as they go. So anyone who manages a sales team who wants to see their sales team practicing their skills, certainly reach out. But for anyone who just wants to try out this type of practice on their own, reach out to us because as I mentioned before, we have this blueprint kit of exactly how to run a practice session that incorporates all those principles I mentioned at the top of the episode of what makes for good practice, right? Being in the improvement zone, getting feedback, knowing what good looks like, etc. And it's already pre-built, ready to go for you. It really doesn't take more than maybe 30 minutes of prep time just to look through the materials. And then you can run this session with your team and they'll get a chance to learn about a specific approach to responding to objections that helps to lower your counterpart's defenses get them to open their mind up to consider and hear out new ideas, and ultimately just keeps the conversation going long enough that your deal doesn't die right there, right? Because all too often an objection comes up and it's like, all right, you got 2 minutes, either change their mind or follow up in 6 months. So this shifts the conversation a bit so that you have the time to really settle in, have a longer conversation, get to another perspective, and work together to try to find a way past it. But again, it also immediately, from the very first words out of your mouth, starts the process of lowering their defenses and opening their mind up. So we designed this for salespeople, right? So a lot of the objections we'll have them practicing is things like, my boss said no to this, or you're too expensive, or, we got to push this out 6 months. But truthfully, anyone who handles negotiations, anyone who hears objections and bad news will benefit from using this as well. So if you want to get access to that blueprint so you can run this practice exercise with your colleagues and your team, you can simply email hello@thepracticelab.co. Mention the name of this podcast, right? Mention that you heard it on Kwame's show, and we can send you the blueprints. It's just like a document we'll send your way. This has like a bunch of videos and instructions embedded into it in a slideshow. We'll send that your way. That way you can very easily, without having to spend any time or effort planning and being about planning this out, you can run a practice session with your colleagues and your team and just see how it feels.
Jonathan, exceptional work, my friend. Really appreciate it. And we also appreciate your generosity. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.